I was privileged to be on the Select Committee and to listen to the submitters that came forward, who actually came forward during the summer holidays because this bill was being pushed through at such a pace. And so I want to start by thanking the submitters and the majority of submitters who actually opposed this bill, who came to represent the people who work in the industries that they're covered by, or who are the professionals that end up having to deal with the claimants at the end after an injury. And as I said, I want to thank them. Mr. Speaker, this bill got off to a very bad start. I do remember the Minister running around at the last minute because he didn't have the numbers. And so, and I think it's continued that way. I think the whole thing has continued that way. Now, the Māori Party did agree to support it through the Select Committee, which gave it the numbers, gave the National Party the numbers, and then, of course, ACT came to the party agreeing to support it through all stages, but they have a deal to open it up to ACC up to, or the work account up to competition, in other words, privatisation. Now, the Māori Party said that they wanted to hear what submitters said, and I'm pleased that they have examined the submissions. I was a bit unhappy and a bit sad that you couldn't make it to hear the submitters, actually. I know you're a small party, so I'm not being critical. I know the Māori Party is a small party, but I do think listening to what people said was very, very powerful, and I congratulate you for listening, unlike the government. Now, going back to this bill, it was introduced, as I said, in a very haphazard way, but also in a climate of fear about the future of the ACC scheme, and we've heard it from members on the other side who continue to perpetuate the myth that ACC's broke and it's in trouble and they're somehow saving it. It's been deliberately manufactured by the Minister and the government, and that's to lay the basis for slashing entitlements, and by privatising the profitable parts of the scheme. What worries me is that this is coming at a time when our workplace accidents are increasing, and accidents and deaths, when injury prevention isn't even mentioned in this bill and seems to be off the agenda, when we've got cuts to health and safety training for workplace representatives and a general close down on any independent advice or involvement of anyone outside the government's club.
They don't care. They have no compassion.
The preparation of the bill was rushed, as was the Select Committee, and as I said, the submitters gave up their time during the summer to come along and have their say. Now, the consultation has been very, very clearly exposed as being inadequate. Te Puni Kokiri warned that the impact of the proposed changes would have a disproportionate effect on Māori. The gender implications and disability perspective in the Cabinet paper is just laughable, absolutely laughable. It's one sentence for each. But even Treasury warned that the regulatory impact statement was inadequate and incomplete in a number of areas, such as things like cost shifting onto other government departments. That has not been quantified. Now, we repeatedly raised the question about cost shifting. There's a lack of information on the nature and extent of the changes to enable experience rating and risk sharing in the work account, and even the Department of Labour admitted to the Select Committee that the work hadn't even begun on this. It hadn't even begun on it. The Treasury also said that while risks are identified, there's little explanation of the likelihood or severity of the risks and no risk mitigation strategies. And of course they also criticised the consultation requirements. They said they had not been met, and where there had been consultation, the concerns that were raised had not been addressed. So other organisations such as business and unions were not consulted, and there was no consultation with professional organisations such as audiologists on the key question of things like removing cover for hearing loss of less than 6%. The concerns of the Ministry of Health about cost shifting from ACC to health were ignored as well. There was no assessment and no answers were forthcoming about these, even though the Ministry of Health said the decisions on the bill should be deferred until some answers could be given. So, as I said, inadequate consultation, inadequate regulatory impact statements, a lot of criticism in the Cabinet papers from key ministries and the Treasury. However, having sat through the submissions, and they were excellent submissions, I'm really disappointed, Mr. Speaker, that the bill has only got minor changes. The government hasn't listened to what the submitters said. They have not listened Submitter after submitter came along and expressed their concerns. Now, there's a couple of issues I want to speak to in particular. The first is the proposal to reduce the weekly compensation for seasonal and part-time workers. Now, the Minister claims this is to stop abuse of the current rules. Somehow, they're on a bonanza. They're in a bonanza, these poor seasonal workers. They're deliberately getting injured so they can get this wonderful years, that's right. But we were provided with no evidence, Mr Speaker, that this was occurring. And it would have been good to see research done on who this affected, the categories of workers, where they work, what jobs they do, and the injury risk profile of these jobs. As the Māori Party has said, many of them are in primary industries and they are overrepresented, seasonal workers overrepresented by Māori workers. What we do know is there's about 400,000 workers in this category. That's a lot. They are low-paid jobs and they have a pattern of work which is different to other people. But I think one of the things that hasn't been understood by the Minister is that just because you're a seasonal worker doesn't mean you work for 3 months and then you don't work for the rest of the year. Many of these workers go in to look for another job and seek another job in between their seasonal job. And the provision in the bill assumes that seasonal workers will not be working once their seasonal employment ends, and it reduces their compensation unjustifiably. Now, John Key likes to say he's concerned about low-paid workers, yet most of these workers are paid close to minimum wage. And just last week, at the big day out, he admitted he would not be able to live on the minimum wage. Yet this miserable provision will reduce compensation for seasonal workers to something well below minimum wage in many cases. And the other whack that seasonal and casual workers will face is, under this bill, is a requirement to use their pre-injury holiday pay earnings before they're entitled to earnings-related compensation. So a seasonal worker under this bill loses 3 ways. They're injured at work, that's bad enough. Then they lose their job, and then they're expected to survive on almost nothing. The Minister and the Government continue to imply that somehow seasonal and casual workers have deliberately set out to get injured so they'd receive the largesse of the changes made in the 2008 bill. And one submitter said, and I thought it was very poignant actually, "I've never known a worker who deliberately comes to work to get injured." And that's so right. I have never known a worker who deliberately comes to work to get injured. The other provision in the bill I want to speak to today, Mr Speaker, is the provision around the abatement of holiday pay. This is another miserly provision, where injured workers who lose their jobs have to use their holiday pay before they get earnings-related compensation. And the Minister says it's double dipping. It's not. This is money that they earned before they were injured. It's their holiday pay. So in addition, Mr Speaker, to losing your job, usually because of injury or redundancy, you lose the holiday pay that you earned before you were injured. Now that is so unfair. That is so mean. And even the Cabinet paper that recommends these and other changes says that the estimated savings are $1 million. $1 million in the scheme. The size of the scheme, that is almost nothing. And most of it in the earners' accounts. Savings, yes, but paid for by workers' hard-earned money that they earned before they were injured. And the stunningly dumb risk assessment on this says claimants may think it's unfair to have weekly compensation abated because of annual leave accrued while they were earning or accrued in a previous financial year but was not paid until termination of employment. Now, even Treasury warned that the relatively small savings didn't seem to justify the unfairness of this provision. Right. So if you take your holidays, you get ACC. If you don't, because you're too busy or too hard working to take the time off, or you're saving the holiday time to be with your family, just forget it. The truth is, Mr Speaker, this is just one example of government's ACC changes that will shift the cost of injury to the worker and to the health and welfare system.